So on Friday just past, Buddhists around the world celebrated what they know as Dharma Day. And of course, it's to commemorate that moment in that particular deer park in front of his five former companions. And what Siddhartha, or the Buddha as he would become known later, offered that day became known as the turning wheel of the Dharma. And I will explain. So it was not a sermon as we know it from the Christian parlance. It was not about divine authority, or he was not demanding any form of belief or religious doctrine. It was simply an invitation to those five, but of course, still to this day, to us, to see clearly. And of course, he was speaking from direct experience, and he was offering a path towards freedom from suffering. And the wonderful thing is that it's so universal and in its essence is so true that whether someone has faith or no faith at all, it doesn't matter. There is wisdom, as we know, in these teachings. And he talked about something that would later be known as the middle way. I'm sure it may be familiar to many of you, but just allow me a couple of lines to explain what I mean. At that time of his teaching, or should I say sermon, Siddhartha found himself living in the midst of extremes, and he himself, of course, had experienced them. Those who thought that holiness or an ability to connect with the divine would be through solitude or deprivation or suffering for the cause. And there were others, of course, who, like his own family and those around him, were living lives that had been given over to excess of one sort or another. And of course, we today see that all around us. Um, but what he did in presenting the middle way, what he was saying, it's not about harsh rules or dogma or trying to appease the divine. It's just more about a habit of mindful discernment. It asks us just to notice something subtle but really important. When we're being pulled towards excess or deficiency, and to gently return to the middle, the place that is life-giving. So the middle way, of course, is not a narrow path between two ditches that you can fall into. It's actually the art of living with enough. And in a world that often pushes us to extremes, the middle way invites us to choose what helps us become more awake, more compassionate, and more, I would like to say, fully human. So the heart of that first sermon not only is about the middle way, but something that may be familiar to many of you. It's known as the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So those of you who love numbers are going to love this. But let me briefly share. The first noble truth is what he shared that day was there is suffering. So what he did is he began with honesty and said, you're right, life includes suffering, pain, loss, disappointment, frustration, anxiety, grief, aging, illness, uncertainty, the list goes on. Now, this truth could sound pessimistic until we realize that, in fact, it's not pessimistic, it's just realistic. We know this from our own lives. I know it from my own lives, and we know it from the news. We know it from the struggles that we see around us, whether they're people we know or people we don't know. So the Buddha was not saying that life is only suffering. He was saying that suffering is part of the human condition. And spiritual maturity, something that he said anyone can achieve, begins when we stop pretending otherwise. And in a culture that we have today, that often urges us to stay busy, and I speak to myself in this, stay positive, and of course, avoid discomfort. The First Noble Truth offers a different kind of compassion. It tells us that when we suffer, we're not failing at life, we're just participating in what it means to be human. And then we, of course, go naturally into the second noble truth, that suffering has causes. And the Buddha taught that much of our suffering arises from this one thing, clinging. Other people might call it attachment. Our tendency to grasp at what we want or what we feel we must keep and protect, and resist, of course, what we don't want, and insist that life must be different than it is. And I must be honest, it's something that I personally struggle with, always wanting maybe something to be different and not liking the reality. And how often do we say, well, I'll be happy when fill in the blank, when I get the job, when my relationship improves, when the world becomes less chaotic, when we get a new president, when my fears might disappear. I don't know what the whens are, but we all have them. And yet, of course, what we also know is when we've fulfilled one desire, another one appears, right? And the mind and the heart keep reaching and yearning and reaching and yearning and reaching and yearning. So the Buddha observed that attachment is to fixed expectations that, of course, can trap us into dissatisfaction. And of course, this insight is not just relevant to what he was going through 2.5 millennia ago. It's exactly what we're experiencing in today's world. And we live in an age that's designed to keep us wanting more and more and more, right? More possessions, more clicks, more Facebook friends, more approval, more certainty, more control, whatever. So the Dharma, or his sermon, asks a gentle but profound question. What if peace from within does not come from getting everything we want? I'll let that land for a moment. What if it comes from learning a different relationship to wanting itself? So the third noble truth, that freedom is possible. And this is where the turning point in these noble truths come. So the Buddha didn't just stop with a diagnosis of our human condition. The Buddha proclaimed that suffering can be transformed, and we're not condemned to live forever in fear or resentment or anger or hurt or craving. It doesn't mean that things like that will disappear. Rather, it means that we are no longer completely ruled by our reactions to them. And in this, I paused for a moment when I was writing today's sermon. and thought immediately of Pema Chodron. Now, those of you who love her as much as I do, she's been a profound teacher to me. Of course, an American Buddhist. Her teaching changed my life. And for those who are you note takers, I think you might like this one. She says 3 words: hold your seat. It sounds simple, but it's quite profound. In other words, when resistance or discomfort burns, don't get up and run. Don't leave your meditation seat. Don't get off your yoga mat. When I was doing yoga a lot in New York, sometimes I would have to face a lot of my limitations and my fears. And it was everything I wanted to do was just get off my yoga mat. And Pema said, when you feel like that, that's the time to sit still and hold it. Stay with it. Don't run away from it. Sit, breathe, be patient, and just allow it to pass in their own time, which they always do. And it's then when we discover a deeper spaciousness within us. That's what the Buddha was saying, and a greater capacity. And many of us have, at some times or other in our life, I'm sure all of us in one way or another have glimpsed this. The circumstances may not have changed, but something within us suddenly became quieter, clearer, more open, less gripping on us. And the Dharma reminds us that such moments are not by accident. In fact, as Pema Chodron said, holding on to your seat, these things can be harnessed, made peace with, and they become our most powerful teachers. So the fourth noble truth is this. So again, you see the progression from the diagnosis to the path. He says, there is a path. And he offered it and said, actually, there are 8 parts to this path, and each one is part of the human experience. A practical guide, if you like, to living wisely and compassionately. Now, I'll read them out. If you want to watch this retroactively, I'll also post it, if you like, on our website for those of you who've never heard this before, but I'm pretty sure most of us have. Right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right work or livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Now, notice that these are not a list of beliefs. They're simply a way of life. And for our purposes today, I'm just going to focus very quickly on 3 of them that I think speak powerfully to the world and the moment we now find ourselves in, collectively as well as individually. The first one I've chosen is right speech. And in, of course, the age of social media, political polarization, and constant commentary, right speech feels somehow urgently contemporary. And the Buddha encouraged speech that is truthful, helpful, and compassionate. I'm sure some of you will have heard these 3 questions, and these are things that we need to ask ourselves when we speak. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Imagine how our families, our workplaces, our congregations, our communities, even our society might change if we practiced even just a little more of this wisdom. And as Unitarian Universalists, of course, we affirm always the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and right speech, I believe, becomes one way of honoring that dignity. The second one I wanted to look at is right mindfulness. And mindfulness has become a popular word, but the Buddha's teaching was not simply about relaxation. It was about waking up. And again, that's not woke, which of course has now become, unfortunately, a very loaded word. What he was saying is waking up means becoming aware with honesty and humility. And how much of our lives do we spend on autopilot? I don't know about you, but sometimes I can't even remember doing half the things I've done. I go back and find out that I have done them, but I don't remember them. And I think, why don't I remember them? Is it age? And then I realize, no, I was just on autopilot. But of course, autopilot too is very often in our minds, replaying the past, worrying about the future. And then when we do that, we miss the present moment entirely. And right mindfulness invites us to pay attention to our thoughts, our emotions, our bodies, our relationships, and to the world around us. And when we become mindful, we begin to notice our habits. We see when anger gets triggered, when fear might be driving some of our decisions. We can see when compassion could be possible if we just made some space for it. And mindfulness, therefore, creates that space into which I think, and he was saying, wisdom, clarity, healing, and the end of suffering can enter. And finally, right action. What he was saying is the Dharma is not just interior, inward. It has ethical consequences. And if we recognize our interconnectedness, this is something we've spoken about together so often, especially around the principle of Ubuntu that many of you I know remember, then how we treat others matters profoundly. Compassion is, the Buddha was saying, not an optional extra. It's the natural expression of awakening. And this resonates, of course, very deeply with our UU commitment to justice, equality, and compassion in all of our human engagements. And the Buddha's teaching reminds us that our inner transformation and our outer transformation belong together. A peaceful heart that ignores suffering is incomplete. Activism that burns with hatred is incomplete. And the Dharma, remember that middle way, seeks a path where wisdom and compassion walk hand in hand. And why does this matter? Because the human heart has not changed as quickly as technology has. I'm sure we would agree. We still struggle with fear. We still struggle with anger. We still struggle with loneliness. We struggle with attachment and grief and uncertainty. We still long for meaning. So the Buddha's first sermon speaks across centuries because it addresses these enduring realities, and it does not promise a life without difficulty. Rather, it offers a way to meet difficulty with greater clarity, compassion, and freedom. Perhaps the most timeless gift that the Buddha gave us in this sermon is that we all are capable of awakening. Not awakening into perfection, but awakening into greater awareness of ourselves, of others, of our world. An awakening into, he said, a liberated way of being. So, in closing, let me just say this. I imagine that small gathering in the deer park so many centuries ago, 5 listeners, no microphones, no internet, no global audience, and yet the words spoken there that day have echoed across millennia. And why? Because they spoke to something utterly universal, universal to the human experience. So on this Dharma Day weekend, may we remember that suffering is real and we need not hide from it. And that suffering, yes, has causes and we can learn from them. That freedom is possible even in our imperfect lives. And that there is a path of wisdom, compassion, mindfulness, and ethical living. So my desire for myself and for us as a community and for us as a nation and as a world, may we continue to look for and find in ourselves the capacity to walk that path in our own way. And may we turn the wheel of compassion in our own lives and in our communities. And may that timeless wisdom of the Dharma help us become even more awake, even more kind, and even more free. May it be so, and so it is. Thank you, everyone.
If you like this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.